people can kind of have parts that get really blended with each of those being a fixed identity, like I am a top, I am a bottom, I am verse, I am a side, versus it being a role. And I guess I could kind of see that a little bit as a burden, right? Not any of those particular, it being a burden to have those roles, but to confuse the roles for who one is.
Mhm.
And that so often happens. Like, that's one of the worst things with burdens.
Hey, curious people, you're listening to the Self Led in Bed podcast, where we explore our fascinating internal sexual landscapes and discover our authentic sexual selves. I'm your host, Patricia Rich, a certified internal family systems and sex therapist, coach, and creator of the Self Led Sexuality Model for healing, pleasure, and empowerment. I've spent the last 30 years helping people to develop fulfilling relationships with themselves and others. If you're ready for some warm, smart, and juicy conversations, me and my parts invite you and your parts to get cozy and settle in. On today's episode, I speak with Max Littman about his new book, Internal Family Systems Therapy for Gay and Queer Men, a companion for after coming out. It is the first IFS book to center the inner lives and the larger systems that particularly impact gay and queer men. I found the book very engaging and wide-ranging, as was our conversation, which wove together IFS, attunement, inner and outer dynamics related to preferred sexual positions, social media's role, and aspects of drag. Max and I also discovered a shared love of language, especially puns, which he recognizes as a clue that he has a good amount of self-energy on board. Max Littman, LCSW, is an IFS therapist, consultant, and author based in the San Francisco Bay Area. His work centers on attunement, attachment, cultural burdens, and relational and neurobiological understandings of trauma. He specializes in working with gay and queer men and provides mentorship to therapists in private practice. Please be aware that this episode includes explicit sexual content and listener discretion is advised. Hi, Max. Welcome to the Self Led in Bed podcast.
Hi, thanks for having me.
I'm looking forward to our conversation today. And before we go any further, I'm wondering if you would like to share with listeners where you're located in the world.
Yeah, so I'm in Oakland, California. Imagine most people know where that is. If those don't, it's just to the east of San Francisco, just over the bay, over the Bay Bridge. We used to live in San Francisco, but we moved maybe 4-ish years ago because me and my husband needed more room. We were working from one-bedroom apartments during COVID, me doing therapy and him working for Google. So nice that we have our own offices within the house now.
Nice. And do you want to share anything about your identities? And you've maybe started a little bit, and anything more
Yeah.
about your identities or just kind of how you move through the world?
Yeah. Thanks for asking. I mean, when you say that, it's interesting. So as a cis white man, um, I sort of have the luxury and privilege of not thinking that so much unless I'm in progressive or various spaces. Which so I just want to acknowledge that when you asked that question, there was this. Oh, I did. Oh, right. All right. So. Um, and I did kind of reveal a little bit in saying my husband. So I identify as gay, white, cisgender, American citizen, naturalized, born here, which feels incredibly important at this period in time to name that. Um, and what else might be important? Um, Second generation therapist. My father is a semi-retired therapist, um, non-practicing, I would say agnostic Jew, and very well resourced in terms of finances. and in terms of education as well.
Max, are you speaking of
Yes,
yourself or your father now?
myself. Good,
Yourself.
good. Yes,
I kind
yes.
of lost the
Yeah,
transition
yeah.
there. Okay.
Myself. Yes, yes. Thank you. Yeah. Um, I'm sure there's others to name, but I'll leave it at that.
Yeah, thank you for sharing those things. And maybe new to some, if there's some new listeners, I'll share that I use she, her pronouns, identify as a cisgender woman. I located outside of the Philadelphia area. Well, I'm in the Philadelphia area, just outside of the city of Philadelphia. And I'm looking forward to diving in. And the first thing I want to do is congratulate you on your new book. I have it here and it is covered in post-it notes.
I feel very honored.
You should feel honored because there are more post-it notes than I will possibly be able to bring up in this conversation.
Okay. All right.
And the name of the book is Internal Family Systems Therapy for Gay and Queer Men, a companion for after coming out. And I would like to just start, well, A, how does it feel to have completed this? This is so much work.
Uh, it's wild. I mean, and I I dreamed of writing a book at some point, and was like, yeah, and then it's just a dream. It's not going to happen. And um, yeah, it sort of feels like a blur now, even though um, when I was writing it, which it took about a year um, from starting it to it being out. Um, and yeah, feels a little bit surreal, and parts of me have sort of moved on and are like, okay, what's the next thing?
Mm.
And parts of me that don't want to do a whole lot of promoting of it because they don't like me being out there. So I appreciate them being, either willing or being dragged along on this ride of being on this podcast and other ones. Um, uh, so yeah, I mean, it was a joy. It was a joy to write it. Yeah.
And I really felt a sense that you were coming from a place of great mission and passion. And I want to ask about that. What motivated you to specifically write a book about IFS for gay, so not only for gay and queer men, but for gay and queer men after coming out? Can you say a little bit about all of that?
Yeah. Thanks for asking that question. It's important. Uh, where to even start there?
So maybe
So,
start even with IFS. Like, what do you want to just
yeah,
say briefly? What's your relationship to IFS?
sure. Yeah, that's a good place to start. Um, so I first heard about IFS through my cousin. So he's my dad's first cousin, just in terms of age. It seems like he would be more of an uncle age than a cousin age. His name is Larry Brown, and he trained with Dick directly for his level one, I think in the early 2000s. So I, was consistently hearing that. And then also from my dad, who was saying like, oh, Larry's doing this thing that seems like a interesting thing. My dad being a therapist as well. And uh, once I got into the profession as a social worker, um, my, my dad was sort of pushing me like, hey, maybe you should learn more about this thing that Larry's doing. And um, it just was never really the right time because I was working in psychiatric crisis care and didn't really make sense to kind of that modality in a short-term setting. And then once I got into long-term therapy, doing long-term therapy with folks, um, my dad started to, whisper in my ear again. And then finally, he got me aware of a training that Derek Scott was doing through IFSCA, just a introduction to IFS, like a 2-day thing specifically for gay men. And then it sort of went from there sometime in 2020. I don't remember exactly when that would have been. And then um, just became it, as so many people say, it just made sense to me after after going through it myself experientially and using it with clients. It's like, oh, this is way more effective than anything else that I'm doing, and it makes way more sense than anything that I'm coming across. So it's just kind of exploded from there for me in terms of doing retreats and trainings and what have you, and then up until today, writing that book. Um, yeah,
I notice feeling so um, just the sweetness of having your father be a mentor and leading you to this. Probably lands on a part where I had a very different reaction from my father about even becoming a
um,
social worker, let alone anything else. So that's probably why that lands so profoundly. But I just, appreciating that in your this is in your like legacy. We talk about legacy burdens a
yeah,
lot. It sounds like there may
heirloom.
be a
Yeah,
legacy heirloom or gift here in that
yeah,
regard.
yeah, yeah,
So then moving through your title again for gay and queer men. So maybe just
yeah.
if you could define as you would gay and queer men.
Yeah. So I would say this is to me. Gay can also be talking about cisgender women as well, but in the book, I'm referring to cisgender men who exclusively have romantic and sexual relationships with men. And I added the word queer in there because increasingly, um, men who have sex with men have much more um, complex relationships to their sex, to their gender, to who they're attracted to. And it just seemed to me that there were a lot of um, men uh, that I work with that identify as queer and not gay. And that's what I wanted to speak to in the book is being inclusive of um, both gay men and queer men. So just to give you an example of, um, uh, I'm thinking of friends of mine that identify as queer and are mostly, if not almost exclusively, having relationships, sexual and romantic, with men. Um, and as I understand it, they identify as queer because one, they don't want to promote a binary thinking of like somebody who's only gay or only straight. You can't be somewhere in between, or same thing when it comes to gender. So that was part of it, and also there are it's just it gets really complicated. I actually was having this having this conversation with my editor when we were working together to finish the book, and my editor wrote gender unburdening, so it was a especially interesting conversation to have with them. So uh, yeah, because me personally, I identify as a gay cisgender man, but there are. What do you say if you're attracted to a transgender man? Like would you say that's gay? I don't know.
Yeah.
So I still personally identify as gay, but I also see it queer as a spectrum, and I'm on the gay side of the spectrum in terms of like being more exclusively attracted to men and being in a long-term committed monogamous relationship with a man. So, um, yeah, I'm sure there's more nuances that I'm not covering there, but that's kind
Mhm.
of, that's the main thing. It mostly covers gay men, but it seemed really important to me to use the term queer in there too.
Well, something I appreciated in this book was the care you took to define things like that and who the book is for and why. And while a lot of the things you're identifying would be relevant and useful, I think beyond the
Yeah.
specific population, just continuing to center gay and queer men gave it so much focus. Like we're not just, I guess maybe these are my parts too that have struggled with writing because they want to be so global. So we're very aware that you had a really nice sense of really targeting a particular group of people, not targeting. That's a bad word these days.
Ah,
Focus,
well, I mean, we use the term target
centering.
part. Yeah, we use the term target part, which, sometimes my parts are like,
Yeah.
ooh. That's why I
Yeah.
don't think I ever used the word target part in
Right.
in the book. I
Right.
think for
Isn't it
that reason.
interesting? Triggering, I got triggered, my target part got triggered. It's like interesting, right? How all this language of certain kinds of
Yeah.
militant type language make it in.
Yeah.
But anyway, moving through your title, okay, we've gotten through two-thirds of your title. Internal family systems for gay and queer men, a companion, and I liked that word and was interested in that, a companion for after coming out. So this is not the, oh no, I think I'm gay
Yeah.
book.
Right, exactly. So to me, it feels like that's been ground that's been covered um, really well and exhaustively, and and I'll say parts of me were just like, oh, that's boring. Like we know, you know. So that's some of it. But the other piece of it is like I didn't feel like there was much um, well-seen literature out there specifically on after coming out. Like I think that's what I wanted to write, or that's what I wanted personally, or my parts wanted, um, more than anything about IFS being attached to it. Um, so that's a piece of it. That's a huge piece of it, actually. Um, and then the companion, because I didn't want it to be a guide. Like I think that's partially about my own systems, what's useful for my own system, or these days useful. Like sorry other authors, but my system hates workbooks right now, just hates it. They were even, there even needed to be some negotiation about doing the exercises in the book, which I know for a lot of people are really helpful. But my parts were like, why are we doing these exercises in here? But the negotiation was there's all this other stuff about being seen and witnessed. That was uh, I think that speaks to the companion pieces. Um, I didn't want it to feel like a workbook or a guide or homework or something. I wanted it to be an opportunity um, for gay and queer men to have their parts seen. And a part of me is giggling at that, um, but have their
Yeah.
experiences seen. And after I didn't realize until after the book was fully written, uh, and I was kind of going through the formatting and the all the kind of aesthetic stuff that I'm like, oh, this book was actually written partially by and for um, parts of me that still hold personal and cultural burdens about being in the gay community.
Mhm.
Um, um, so yeah, that's kind of you know, what's behind Companion and specifically Companion for after coming out rather than
Mhm.
coming out.
Mhm. Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that. And I was about to, I was noticed some curiosity coming up, and I'm not asking you to share anything beyond what you would be comfortable to share. But when you say some of your own parts wanting some support navigating the gay and queer community, would you be open to
Yeah,
sharing anything that you found challenging or worthy of more
yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's funny because this sort of harkens back to before coming out, which parts of me are like, don't do that. This is about after coming out. Coming out is so centered already. But yeah, so I also talked about this on Tammy's podcast, which who knows if that one will come out first or this one will come out first. But uh, yeah, you know, I have a teenage part that's still holding burdens around not having guidance or role models, or whether that be guidance specifically from someone, or something in the media or literature, or something very front-facing that you know isn't dangerous or risky to access, about sex and about romance. um, and about relationships and about attraction, crushes, all those things. And sexual health. So you know, um, that one still, even though I'm in a committed monogamous relationship with my husband, who I can hear in the background working, um, I still have that part that has embarrassments around sex, around attraction, around, and a lack of knowledge around a lot of things around sex. So, and I know that one still holds shame. So, and I want to be clear too to listeners. I have pretty clear permission to talk about this right now, which is pretty different than it's been for a long time for me. And like as I'm talking about this, I feel pretty calm and grounded. Like I can sense there's some fear somewhere, but it's still trusting me to talk about this. So
Mm-hmm.
um, let me see, why am I saying that?
Yeah.
I'm saying that because I know very personally uh, how not okay it can be for parts to talk about this out loud, and I want to acknowledge that even though I'm talking about it, that other people, it's really listen to your parts as to um, how you, who and how you want to talk about it out loud.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so, and
Yeah.
I also want to thank you, Patty, for that because, I without the work you've been doing in this community, in the IFS community, I would not have become aware of that trailhead or that part. I would have, maybe I would have, but you certainly were contributed in becoming more aware of and understanding that part. So thank you.
Glad to hear that that's been reaching you in your parts. It means a lot to me. And if I may, I was going to just appreciate, the vulnerability of sharing and how your process of checking in with your parts is such a good example of that. And sometimes, we have the permission, or I talk a lot about internal consent, this notion of
Yeah,
internal
yeah,
consent around self-disclosure. And sometimes we have the consent and there's still a little tenderness around it. There's still like, can I trust this? Is this really okay?
yeah,
Um, and something I, you know, just could add on here, um, and I'd mentioned to you before we started, I don't want to de-center the population that your book is focused on. And I just want to say in the work that I've been doing for so many years with people around their sexual systems, there's so often adolescent parts who are
yeah,
so
yeah,
burdened, just so much confusion, so much lack of mentorship or language or tips or, all those things.
yeah,
And it's such a common age range, that people often land on when they're exploring their sexuality and any kinds of,
yeah,
experiences with shame, but
yeah,
then magnifying it when the desires and what's naturally feeling authentic is something that is so, either explicitly or implicitly maligned.
yeah, yeah. I mean, I'm going to go off on two tangents. I'm going to be brief with these. One, just as you're sharing that, what comes up for me is I don't know what it's like for you and your work with um, just people of various identities, but uh, working with gay and queer men, I'm often coming across I should say, we are coming across parts that are adolescence, like not just adolescence, but like early 20s as well, kind of, puberty through the early 20s, um, that never had the opportunity to explore more about who they were sexually, what they were interested in, um, you know, growing romantically. And this is one of the interesting phenomena and kind of helpful, I think. And I know this is this happens in straight communities as well as ethical non-monogamy. And it's my experience is it's much more prevalent in the gay and queer community than it is in the straight community. It's much more accepted. Um, and it's a complicated thing, but I've seen so many clients and those parts uh, get a lot of healing from being able to have those explorations while having still having a primary safe relationship with a partner. So that's what came up as you were sharing that, and
Mm.
I can't remember what the other thing was, so I'll leave it.
I'm wanting to read something that since I have all these post-its here in your book, and this was under a subheading of sexual health concerns.
Yeah.
And you said that many gay and queer men grow up without access to inclusive or affirming sexual health education, and this absence can leave exiles carrying confusion, fear, and shame around sex and safety. In response, managers may become hypervigilant, obsessively researching symptoms, insisting on strict safety protocols, or seeking constant reassurance. And firefighters may cope by denying the risks entirely and engaging in behaviors that numb or distract from underlying fears. Community norms that minimize sexual health concerns or stigmatize caution can compound these dynamics, leaving parts feeling even more isolated. Does that sound familiar?
It does sound familiar. Yes, yes, it does.
Yeah, and I guess, when I've been spelling out this model for self-led sexuality, I have IFS on there, and then I have education as, about human sexuality. And this
Mhm,
is really speaking to that because I believe a lack of education and support and guidance leads to burdening. And I liked how
mhm,
you really got specific in elaborating this. And then you had a case study of Tyler, who
mhm,
was a 29-year-old gay white man who came to therapy with a quiet but persistent fear of STIs. And despite being sexually active, he had not been tested in over a year. A part avoided testing altogether, afraid that knowing the results would confirm something catastrophic. But then another part was scouring health forums. And so there was the polarization there.
mhm.
And then you said beneath those protectors was an exile who had learned to associate sex with danger, silence, and shame. I just thought that, like, again, the content, there's so many layers here, the
Yeah.
context, and just want to toss it to you if anything, any comments you want to make about that particular case study or situation.
Yeah. Well, a whole lot of things. Well, let's see if this speaks towards this, because there's just something, an example that came to mind that's not specific to that case study. But so I don't know how recent this was, but there's so much stuff out there on YouTube now about uh, just sex education in general, but especially for gay men. And I was watching a video uh, about like preparation for bottoming. And for listeners who don't know, bottoming means you take the role of having um, a person's penis being inserted into you. There's a lot of different, well, we can get into that later if we need to, but there's a lot of shame around that. But anyway, so um, I was watching the video and I think it's a guy that was on OnlyFans or, image was a huge piece of his brand. But it was interesting to watch him um, talk about and demonstrate. Not like he wasn't showing anything because you can't really do that on YouTube, but he had the various devices and talking through what you need to do. And I was just like, man, this would have been nice to have had when um, when I was a teenager. And not only that, it not just be available, but be like, hey, this is important and this is okay to watch. It's in fact, it's important to watch. And you don't necessarily need to do this. Um, or, maybe you are a bottom, maybe you're not. Maybe parts of you are identify with that role, maybe parts of you don't. Um, but yeah, that's, in you bringing up
Yeah.
that part of the book, that's kind of what comes up for me.
Hmm. Yeah. Um, the pros and cons of social media come up for me, which you
Yeah,
addressed. I loved in this book how specific you were about looking at Instagram influencers and how they impact our parts.
yeah.
And so I'm hearing you talk about YouTube and just, what a mixed bag we have
Hmm.
around access
Yeah,
now as compared to 20 years ago on for
yeah,
sexual health information and being able to find stuff without having to be, exposed, to others. So there's access to good information, but then there's also such an influx of porn. We haven't talked about pornography yet, and all of
yeah,
the good, bad, the ugly, the kinky, the like, there's
yeah,
so much going on in the world of pornography and how that might affect people's parts.
yeah.
Um,
Yeah,
and
that's
then
something
the social
I wish I had
messaging.
written. Yeah, that was something I sort of in retrospect wish I had included in the book at some point because I really don't talk about pornography that much, if at all. And I mean, I know this is true for me, and I'm pretty sure this is true for most gay men, um, of a certain age, I should say. And by certain age, I mean like millennials, me being a millennial as well. That's the other one I wanted to add to my identifiers. Um, that was the one I forgot. But I think it's true a little bit for Gen Z. I think less true for Gen Z than for millennials um, on Gen X, baby boomers, etc. But pornography being kind of the first, um, uh, you know, education on sex for gay men. Yeah, which,
Mhm.
parts of me are just like, um, yeah, like it's a whole complicated thing because there's so much shame around that, and it's definitely not the ideal way to learn about sex, but it's also kind of all that some of us had.
Hmm.
So it's just
Right,
this mixture of
right,
things of
right,
like shame there, plus like, okay, but we kind of did the best that we could with what we had.
right. This again, similar to what I was saying before, resonates with, I think, across
Yeah,
the spectrum of sexual orientation. Many people of these younger generations have such easy access, despite the best of attempts, perhaps by their caregivers, to the super explicit material. And then
yeah,
it's way beyond often what they're in a position to process or digest on their own. And it wakes up
yeah,
all these circuits. So then adding on again the stigma and the secrecy and the shame of
yeah,
where does this place me societally if this is
yeah,
what turns me on?
yeah. It feels like it's hard for all of us. I mean, um, I don't know many straight people or yeah, many straight people who've said like, yeah, I had a perfect experience growing up about sex and relationships. My parents taught me everything.
Right, exactly.
I had a great, sex education class. It was perfect.
Yes, it is a rare thing. And again, magnified. And one thing you do, I think, very nicely in the book is you do continue to recognize context, right? Because for someone who's growing up in a fairly socially progressive family or community, these things will still be there, but they're
Yeah,
not going to be placing the level of actual danger
right,
or, alienation that someone would be likely to experience if they're in a more high control conservative
right,
culture or community. So I
right.
think, intersectionality you mention in your book and is so important here. I sort of want to circle back to that case example because I think it comes up here, right? That around testing or not testing, perhaps.
Oh, okay.
and polarized parts around that. And depending maybe where someone lives and what their access is to
Right.
testing and
Right.
to privacy, like there's the inner stuff, but there's also, is this a person who has the socioeconomic
Yep.
access to, testing for STIs? Is this someone who can trust that there's privacy within the
Right.
healthcare environment?
Well, and
You know,
non-judgment as well, because
Mhm.
I'm certainly in being in the Bay Area. I mean, California in general, but especially the Bay Area of California. Um, it's, for some people, I mean, parts of me believe this, it's gay Mecca. Um, and it's just not hard to find um, LGBTQ plus um, affirming care. Oftentimes, LGBTQ plus providers. Um, so, yeah, I mean, I'm thinking on one of my own experiences um, where you just go in and you get tested, and then they tell you all the things, and basically do the stuff that I wish I would have had when I was a teenager. And uh, and yeah, just speaking to what you were sharing is, I'm thinking more in rural locations,
Mhm.
but this may
Yeah.
be true in larger cities as well, of having doctors, whether they're being explicitly or implicitly judgmental, it has, a real impact.
Mhm. Yeah. And this might also be a good chance to bring in that question of sexual position. And I thought this was so interesting that different parts might show up related to different positions. And yeah, again, that maybe for people who are not gay and queer men, sexual position probably doesn't register in the same with the same
Yeah,
social meaning, although I mean it
yeah,
may in certain ways, but the way it is an identifier and like you said, sort of a locus
right,
for who's even a possible match for me on the
right.
one hand, and then the shame which you were referencing about bottoming,
Yeah. Hmm. Hmm.
and then parts that come out around that. You had another case study of someone who was exploring that and had, I think,
Yeah.
a Korean American background. So there were
Yeah.
different levels of coming out and different levels of shame and stigma
Right. Yeah. Mhm.
related to being receptive, anal receptive.
Yeah. Man, so complicated there. Let's see where I have a couple places I want to go with that. So um, maybe for listeners, I'll go and do the best I can in defining sexual positions when it relates to gay men and queer men. Um, so top means the person that is inserting their penis into the other person's mouth, or basically they're the one doing the penetrating. Bottom is the person who's in the role of being penetrated. Um, Versatile means being open to or interested in both of those roles. And then a term that's uh, been used more recently. I don't know when it came into being, but side, meaning somebody that's not interested in penetrative sex and gets enjoyment out of non-penetrative sex.
Mhm.
And the guy that coined that term is a therapist named Joe Court, who you recommended one of his books to me, Patty, actually. So thank you for that. And he was very kind to um, write an endorsement for the book when I reached out to him. So, um, but yeah, so that covers the definitions. And so often people can kind of have have parts that get really blended with each of those being a fixed identity, like I am a top, I am a bottom, I am verse, I am a side, versus it being a role. And I guess I could kind of see that a little bit as a burden, right? Not any of those particular, it being a burden to have those roles, but to confuse the roles for who one is.
Mhm.
And that so often happens. Like that's one of the worst things with burdens, right? Is um, parts see it as I am this versus I hold this.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you for that. And some little part of me, I think this was implied, but when you were saying a top and
Mm.
mentioned oral
Yeah,
insertion, that could also be
yeah,
anal
yes,
insertion, right?
yes, exactly. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
And the point you're making there about the identity that comes around that, right? It's not just a role and it's also not just a preference, like unless you're
yeah,
verse,
mm,
right?
yeah,
And then there's power and hierarchy in the
right,
community in relation to that, right?
right. So yes, so I would say every gay man would say this. I would say in my experience, but I would, I haven't come across a gay man that would say um, bottom, somebody that identifies as a bottom has more um, social currency than somebody who identifies as a top. And this is so wrapped up in sexism and patriarchy and masculinity, where tops, quote unquote, are seen as more masculine, therefore it's better. And bottoms are seen as more feminine, which is, weak, worse, what have you. So this is talk about intersection. Like that's a huge intersection here, and it gets so complicated too because there are people that bottom. I'll say it that way rather than identifying people as bottoms, which is just that language is used constantly um, in the community. And it's used in profiles a lot for dating and hookups. Is the identifier of being a bottom, being a top, being verse, etc. Um, uh, there are people who bottom that when you look at them, it's like, oh, that person's super masculine and super like beefed up and like can, you know, beat up anybody. Um, and then their preference is bottoming. So it's really hard to um, uh, know exactly what a person's preferences are or their identity is. But, kind of that aside, something that was important for me to name in the book that I was starting to recognize within myself and within my clients is parts have different preferences. It's like just because somebody um, exclusively uh, is in the role of top doesn't mean all their parts want to do that. And same thing when it comes to bottoming or versatile. And that's, as a kind of tangent, there are parts that use versatile out of the fear of being labeled as a bottom and being labeled as lesser than, even if they don't ever really top or, they don't have parts that are interested in that role. So, um, uh, yeah, I'm sure there's more to share
Yeah.
there, but
Yeah.
that's what's coming to me right now.
It's just striking me how much there is to navigate in terms of A, what do I actually enjoy?
Yeah,
And different parts of me may, um, not me, but as
yeah, yeah, yeah.
you know,
The royal we.
the royal we, um, what do I want? What do different parts of me want?
Yeah,
What do we have permission to even explore for
yeah,
ourselves internally,
yeah,
literally, internally,
yeah. Literally, yeah, yeah,
penetrating or internally psychological parts?
yeah.
And then what's the meaning that that will have in my social milieu, and how do I want to
Exactly.
navigate that? And then
Yeah,
what do people assume about me based
yeah.
on
Well,
those things?
that's, I mean, kind of bringing back up the case example that you'd mentioned of the Korean American client. So often, uh, Asian gay men and queer men are stereotyped as being bottoms. Like that's just the identity of an Asian person. And then there's also objectifying that happens with that. Um, and it's interesting. So this is such a tangent, but I'm reading Kurt Kearney's book right now on IFS and psychedelics, and he talks about Martin Buber's difference between uh, I think I thou and something it, and I thou being much more self energy and self led because you're
Like a relationship between two
being,
beings, right? It's
yeah,
I and
versus
thou versus,
object, yeah,
yeah.
versus an object, a subject versus an object. And I think that happens a lot depending on one's ethnicity. So kind of the stereotype with Asian men are, quote, being a bottom, and with Black men are, quote, being a top.
So these are stereotypes and objectifications that get
Yes,
made at a cultural level that may not align with someone's
correct.
actual preferences.
Yeah, exactly. And, and
And
then
then if they do, I think sometimes, we tend to think, oh, what if I don't fit that? But then sometimes, well, what if I do
exactly.
fit that? Then what?
Yes,
Then am I confirming this stereotype that feels
yes.
really, harmful?
Yeah, yeah, um, yeah, exactly. There's a really good film that addresses this a little bit called Fire Island, if you've heard of it. It's Bowen Yang from SNL and Joel Kim Booster, who's a comedian. They're both Asian gay slash queer men. I'm not sure they identify as gay or queer. But it's a retelling of, I think, Pride and Prejudice, but a modern retelling of it from a gay Asian male perspective.
Interesting. That might be a good segue into yet additional amazing content in your book because you really explore the role of popular culture in terms of movies and TV and
Yeah,
music on the identity and sort of just maybe the idea of of companionship, right? How
yeah,
popular culture can offer companionship to the parts of gay
yeah,
and queer men who maybe don't find expression more
yeah,
directly.
yeah, absolutely. Um, I'm glad you caught that the companion piece is very important in those chapters. And um, as you're bringing that up, I'm thinking about a film that I mentioned just in the list of films that are you know helpful to watch that are um, positive representations of gay and queer men and multifaceted and you know um, and I I guess I wish I had talked about this more closely in it, but Moonlight, um, which tells the story of a gay black man and his kind of the trajectory of when he was a young child, probably 8 years old, until he was a like 20 something person. And it's just deeply um, it just treats him like a human being. Like sometimes I think of like the films and shows that I like the most are ones that um, where the filmmaker is portraying them from self-energy.
Mhm.
Like you can just from a place of like this is a complicated person. They're neither good nor bad. It's just clear
It's
that
nuanced and
yeah,
not
yeah,
a so let me contrast that with something
yeah.
else you address in your book.
Okay.
My parts that crammed preparing with the book are super proud
Uh,
of themselves that they're remembering all this stuff.
my kind of my nerdy sharer, preparation parts are just like loving it. So yeah,
Because you talked about the impact of drag and
I love it.
because we're going from nuance and subtlety
Yeah,
and
to not.
directors that can really see the
Yeah,
complexity to
yeah,
this sort of caricature in a way of what? What would you
yeah.
say about what
Oh,
is
it's
so
it.
powerful about drag? And you even refer to it as what did you call it? A ritual of healing,
Yes,
something
yeah,
like that.
yeah. At its best,
Yeah.
definitely. Yeah, just as an aside from like a gay person and writer's perspective, this was the one I was most excited about, this chapter. My writing part was sort of, didn't love how it turned out, but um, or parts have how parts of it turned out, but it was certainly like there has to be a chapter of drag in here. Like this is what's going to differentiate this book from like a academic book. Like this one's for the gays. Um, so yeah, I sort of want to speak about this and, towards the topic that, is your wheelhouse and what this podcast is about is like there's so many sexual innuendos that drag queens use. And it's just so joyful and freeing and playful, and it's sort of turning everything on its head. Something that RuPaul has said. I'm not sure if RuPaul's
Of
the first.
RuPaul's Drag Race, you mean?
Yeah, yeah, which is what's been the explosion of the popularity of drag, and I think has made it more socially acceptable. I mean, I know before I came out, and before there was Drag Race, um, my parts were like, oh, I don't know about this. It's very loud. I don't know, flamboyant. But after Drag Race, it's sort of like, oh, this is an art form. But the last thing I'll say about that is it's what RuPaul had said was, um, uh, we're born naked and the rest is drag. Um, and to me, it's such a culturally unburdening statement of like, hey, like, all this other stuff, like our identity is is not the clothes that we have on. It's not the experiences we have. It's not the things we feel. That's how I take it.
Wow. So yeah, the I'm just feeling into that a bit, and the that statement, that we're born naked and the rest is drag. That the parts of me are like really liking that, and then the celebration aspect. The and actually in your book, you talked also about the crash that can happen too if someone like there's different ways to interact with drag, right? As a
Yeah,
being the drag artist, the drag queen, taking that on personally, or
yeah,
going to a show or interacting as an observer,
right.
and
Yeah.
then also the crash that can happen if you fully
Which crash are
embody
you?
one part. You talk about someone who maybe I don't know if they
Oh,
actually were a
Gloria
drag
Hole.
queen, who was you were doing a session with them afterward of like a crash of dep
Oh,
depression afterward, maybe, or like
oh, okay. I think I
emptiness
know who you're. Yeah,
afterward. Because
yeah,
sometimes when we really, and again, in my own humanity, I can resonate with that in a different way of whenever I've come out big,
yeah,
I've done a big presentation, or I really went crazy at a dance
yeah,
party, maybe at the
yeah.
IFS conference.
Did that happen at this past IFS conference?
It may have.
Did you get backlash for
And
that
then
inside?
backlash later. Actually, what happened was I threw my hip out. That was the
Ah,
bigger problem. That was a
uh,
come down for my aging parts. Um,
uh,
but that one wasn't so much a I showed too much, more like uh-oh, I
okay,
couldn't live up to my
okay, all right.
the stage I set here. Um, but the idea of being big,
Yeah,
really
yeah,
embodying a part, and maybe a
yeah,
part that's really um, owning something that isn't owned as much.
yeah, yeah.
And then later parts that are like, whew,
I mean, that's the thing that I wonder about because the the case example, well, not the case examples in that chapter is just me imagining what it could be like to, as a therapist, a professional drag queen. And
as a therapist to be a professional drag queen, are you
a
saying?
therapist of a professional drag
Oh,
queen,
to be
like
the
to,
therapist of a drag queen. So the
yeah, yeah,
client, the drag queen being the client. And I guess maybe
yeah,
if I could just say for a minute that while the book is called A Companion, for after coming out, it's written
yeah,
both to gay and queer men, and there's some special notes for therapy
Yes,
professionals and for allies, right?
correct. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, my hope with all of that was like, okay, yes, this is for my gay and queer community, but also it was like, oh, like there's so many things here that would be helpful for allies and professionals to know that doesn't feel like it's really out there unless you're really in the community or you're kind of consistently hearing
Mm,
it from the gay community. Like I'm talking about drag queens, lingo, the top bottom verse, that kind of
right,
stuff,
right.
the intersectionality pieces of it. I mean, it's certainly, if I were to just walk up to a gay person and talk about these things, it's like, oh yeah, but I'm not so sure that this stuff is all kind of common knowledge for allies.
Yeah, that's a really another valuable contribution here. And then circling back to, okay, so if I'm the therapist or someone's the therapist and their client is a drag queen or does
Yeah.
embodies a drag queen at times, what were the points you were wanting people to be aware of?
Oh, yeah. That just because they're out there doesn't mean all parts of them are okay that they're out there. Um, I mean, they may. I'm not sure. I haven't, I would maybe hope one day to have that experience. So if there's any drag queens out there that are looking for therapy, hit me up. Um, but uh, yeah, it's just I think it comes back to the IFS thing of like not all parts are going to be okay with the decisions that we're making. And how do we um, keep those parts in mind and tend to them? This is it's another tangent. I think about that with uh, committed relationships too, of like not all parts are going to be on board with a specific committed relationship, even if it's the right thing for the whole system. And how do we navigate that?
I I appreciate that point, and it can come up in any context, really, right? I've had that
Right,
come up
right.
around lots of different things. But something I think is so valuable is the inner system of parts, really appreciating the parts that are, I like to call it sort of taking it for the team.
Mm,
If there has been a willingness from parts to say,
yeah,
yes, we're gonna, we're not gonna say no, like don't be a drag queen or,
yeah,
don't marry this person.
yeah,
But this is hard for us. Like we're the ones that aren't going to get our needs met in this.
yeah,
And how different it is when the system can really hold and appreciate those parts and give them an
yeah,
opportunity to be witnessed. And so in this example of, maybe being a drag queen is like the best thing, in this person's life,
yeah,
and they don't regret it, but it's part of what you're saying that it's also important to make time and space for the parts that do feel some kind of way about it and need some
yeah.
tending.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is maybe not speaking directly to that, but I don't think I do this as much anymore. But when I have a really good sense that a client has already sort of made a decision, um, or there's some part that has way more power in the system and is going to make this particular decision, I like to ask the client to be like, hey, check for any parts that are not going to be okay with this decision that seems like it's going to be made, and just see what they want you to know, or if there is something that they need, knowing this decision is going to be made that they don't like or they don't agree with.
Yeah. Yeah. So we have just a few minutes left here, and
Mm.
there's
Oh,
so
I'm
much
having a good
more
time,
we
Patty.
could talk about. I know. Well, maybe we'll have a follow-up here. But I guess I just want to say, is there anything we haven't, okay, my little pun, anything we haven't touched on
that
that we need to flesh out? And
Well, that makes me think of two things, which I'm sure there'll be a lot of other things, but there's two things that are coming to mind for me. Um, what One is um, having shared identities. Like I cannot tell you how many times um, gay and queer men have worked with me, and they're like, "Yeah, this is just different than working with um, a straight person, um, whether that be a straight cis male or a straight cis female or what have you, because there are just parts that are just able to relax, um, eh, because certain things don't have to be shared or explained. Um, and I mean, there's little things that, from my self energy that I can do and say, and from some of my parts I can do and say, um, that are very soaked in gay culture that just give a good, nice release. Um, Kind of the playfulness piece of self-led therapists, playful, perspective, persistence, etc. Patience. Uh, so I think about that a little bit, and sort of related to that, just in terms of puns. Um, I love puns. I That's sort of my marker if I have a lot of self energy or if I'm doing particularly well is the more puns that I can think of, the more self energy that's there. I think a little
Maybe
bit.
that's like one of the P words for
Yeah, that's what I
self-energy,
was thinking. Yeah,
punning.
exactly. Yeah, I know. Dick talks about his various things about checking in on how much self-energy he has. For me, sometimes it's like, how punny am I? That's my check. Um, and sort of speaking toward that before we wrap up. Yeah, it's just like puns all the time with clients about sexual stuff. Like I know my therapist is not a gay, he's a straight man, but constantly, for moments I'll be like, do you have any dick jokes, as in Dick Schwartz jokes for me?
Yeah. Yes, that's a good one. I just did a bunch of posts after the having gone to the IFS conference where I invited people to share their dick pics because people all stand online to get a picture
Uh,
with Dick, and
yeah.
he's very willing, and
Uh,
it was cute. So I've really enjoyed the conversation with you, and there's more we could perhaps go into another time. But a couple questions I like to ask people
yeah.
at the end is number one, how can people find you? I'll put things in the
Yeah.
show notes, but maybe you'd like to just say aloud one or two ways
Yeah.
people can find you.
Yeah. My website's the easiest way. Maxlittman.com. Just my name.
Two
Um,
T's, right?
Two T's,
One.
MaxLittman.com. Yeah. So there's a link to my book there. I mean, you can find it on Amazon, any country. Um, it, I think it's in most countries on Amazon. Um, and yeah, and my blog is on there too, is on my website.
Okay. And something I like to close with is if you would be willing to share something you find pleasurable in life.
Oh, geez. Um, I can't beat Dick on that question, but I mean,
It can't be
the,
what?
I can't beat Dick on that one.
Uh,
Oh, no pun intended on that. But
you can
no,
say Dick.
Dick
You can
said sex and
find.
tennis. I
He
mean,
did.
yeah. Well, I mean, it's easy to say sex, but I am going to say sex. Sex, running, video games. Um, you know, um, yeah. I mean, that's what I would say.
Mhm. Yeah, and I'm often recording these on Fridays, so I wish you a nice weekend and maybe you get to engage in some of those things that you find pleasurable.
Yeah,
And thank you so much for sharing your wisdom with
yeah,
the podcast listeners.
yeah. Thank you, Patty. Thanks for the work you do and for the platform.
Thank you for listening to the Self Led in Bed podcast. Check us out at www.patriciarich.com/podcast, where you can sign up for a free guide to the 6 S's of sexual self energy. And if you liked this episode, please subscribe and share it with a friend. Until next time.